Masechet Pesachim, Daf 97. And we're discussing cases where a korban is lost and then found. So when we have a korban Pesach that I designated beforehand, and then I lost it, sometime sometime before the 14th or in the morning, and so I get a replacement. So I designate a replacement. So then it's found. So what do we do with the original korban? Well, it depends. I'm just going to look at the outline here. So it depends. If it's found after I slaughtered or afternoon, we saw machloket yesterday between Rabbi and Rabbi Zera, right? When's the cutoff time? So it could be either the noon when you can first bring korban pesach, or actually when you slaughter it. Okay, one or the other. If it's after the slaughter, so then that pesach, now you just found it. It was not around during the time when you did the slaughtering of the replacement. Therefore, that's good. Then now the one that you found, the original one, you can offer as a shelamim on a later date. That's fine. However, if you lost it and then you found it in the morning, and then now you have two because you already made a replacement. You got to pick one. So you offer the replacement. Now the one that was original that you lost and found now is rejected. Once an animal is rejected because it's available and you didn't use it, then you can never use it as a korban, and so that has to go out to graze and until it gets a blemish and you sell it. So that's the law for korban pesach. What we're going to do now is Shmuel's going to offer a rule in which he compares the rules for korban pesach to the rules for a hatat. Let's read it inside, and I'll come back to this chart. Amar Shmuel, kol shebehatat meta, ba'pesach kareb shelamim. So he is an equivalence. Anything that on Pesach you would bring as a shelamim, and in our case that was when it was found later, so that it was okay. It was never rejected. But in regarding chatat, that ends up with the worst situation. That animal, and here's what happened. Let's say I fried an omelet on Shabbat by mistake. I didn't realize I have to bring a korban chatat. So I designate one beforehand, a few days before. I lose it, and then I got a replacement. I offer the replacement, and then I find it. So now that I found the original one, that one I have to leave to die. It cannot be used for anything. It cannot even be redeemed. It just has to be starved. So unfortunately for the animal. So hopefully we'll make sure not to lose it. Okay. So that's the equivalence. However, However, in regards to Pesach, anything that grazes, so too, sin offering will graze. In other words, if I found it before the slaughter or time of slaughter, then the grazing is both. So grazing is an equivalent, but regarding the one that's found after slaughter, for Pesach, that's a positive. For Chatat, that ends up being a negative. Okay, that's what Shmuel's statement is. And I think, if we just look at it by itself, it's pretty simple, a nice rule of thumb showing the contrast between the two categories. Now, he doesn't say after slaughter or before slaughter, or if it's noon and afternoon for Korban Pesach. So that's going to come up. But now, Shmuel doesn't stand alone. Rabbi Yohanan comes right after. Rabbi Yohanan amad and Pesach kareb shelamim ela shenimsa achar shechita. When can you bring a korban pesach as a shelamim, as a motar ha-pesach it's called? That's only if it's found after shechita. So that when at the time of shechita it was gone, so it was never rejected. But kodem shechita, if it was found before the time of shechita, and now you rejected it because you used the replacement, no, then you cannot use the shelamim, has to go out to graze. Okay, so Rabbi Yohanan, on the face of it, seems to be saying the same thing as Shmuel, and they're both saying it goes by the time of shechita. And we could understand it simply that way. However, we're going to see the Bavli, since they're back to back, reads it as Rabbi Yochanan must be arguing with Shmuel. They are contemporary. Rabbi Yochanan is a little bit later, then overlaps, and a little bit later than Shmuel. So since they're back to back, and Rabbi Yochanan says the cutoff time for when it's found is the slaughtering of the replacement, so Shmuel must say something different. Shmuel must be distinguishing between before and after noon, right? When at noon on the 14th, that's when you can start bringing the korban. If you found it beforehand, then you have to let it graze. If you found it afternoon, then you can offer it as a shelamim. So that's the Gemara is assuming. And now we're going to ask a series of questions on Shmuel to see if this is really true, his rule. Is it consistent? And in the end, we're going to have two versions of it. We're going to end up having to erase the second line of grazing, because if we want to say Shmuel disagrees with Rabbi Yohanan and it all has to work out, then it can't all work out if you assume this grazing line as well. So maybe if Shmuel only said the first line, and then later on someone thought that the second line would make sense and added it, but really not so. Okay, so let's see the questions to Shmuel. Matkif ladav Yosef uchlalahu. Shmuel, is that really a whole general rule that applies all the time? Varech hatat shabra shenata azla. A chatat also has to be less than 1 year old. Let's say it turns 1, and so now it's too old. What do you do with it? Well, you let it graze. דאמר רבי שמעון בן לקיש, חטאת שברה שנתה ראינו אותה כאילו היא עומדת בבית הקברות ורואה. So a chatat offering that is more than 1 year old, we see it as if it's in the cemetery. The point being, if it's in the cemetery, the Kohanim cannot get it because they can't go in there. It doesn't become tameh because a live animal never becomes tameh. But the point is, since it's not accessible, so you have to let it graze. When it gets a blemish, you sell it, and with the money, you use that to buy other shelamim during the year. So that's the law regarding chatat. Let's say a korban Pesach is also supposed to be under 1 year old. Let's say I lost it, I found it, I designated as korban Pesach, but never used it as korban Pesach. And now I'm keeping it around. It's supposed to be a shelamim. Now, if it's more than 1 year old, kadev shelamim detanya keseb. We saw this baraita yesterday. We're going to quote the whole thing again. Lerabot et Pesach la'aliyah. Why? How come in the Torah, when in Vayikra, well, it's not talking about korban Pesach, but it says im kesef. So why does it have to add a whole category and the word im there to teach me that on Pesach I have to offer the fat tail, even though in the laws of korban Pesach it never says that. So this comes to teach me that. Kosho omer im kesef lerabot et Pesach she'abra shenato ushlamim ha'ba'in mechamat Pesach. L'chol mitzvot shelamim. So when it says the word im and kesef, that comes to include that a Pesach that is more than 1 year old, the same case as we just said here, and other shelamim that are brought as a Pesach. For that, you have to do it for a regular Motara Pesach, that you have to apply to it all the laws of shelamim. Sheteonim semicha, you do semicha on it. You don't do that for a korban Pesach, but you do for a shelamim. Untzachim, you have to bring a wine libation. And you have to offer those, the breast and the thigh. There's nothing to do with us, but at the end of the Braita, the next paragraph in Vayikra says, and if it's a goat, why does it have to say a whole paragraph about goat, even though everything else is the same? To teach me that with the goat, we do not offer its tail on the Mizbeach. Okay, the point for us is, here's the question regarding Shmuel made a general rule that the laws of chatat, whenever a chatat grazes, Pesach grazes also. However, here you have a case where a chatat animal ends up being more than 1 year old, so you let it graze. But the Pesach, that's more than 1 year old, is a shelamim. So you see, Shmuel's rule does not work here. So the answer is, it's not clear who's saying Amar le. Some versions don't have those words. But Shmuel could answer, his rule is only talking about cases when the animal is lost and then found. That's when there's an equivalence. But other problems that come up, that would cause it to be deferred, like if it's more than 1 year old, he wasn't talking about those cases. In those cases, there are differences between Chatat and Pesach. So let's just focus on lost ones. Okay, fine. We'll agree to that. V'avud mi mashkachat la. Okay, in cases of lost animals, do you find that the rule is always true? V'hare abuda b'shat haflasha le'rabanan. Azla. If the animal was lost at the time of when you got the replacement, then what do? Ditnan. hifrish chatato ve'abda. So you designated a korban chatat, and then it got lost. So you got a replacement korban. And now we found the first one, right? This is good. The regular case of a lost item. And now you found it before the time of slaughter. And so now you have two chatat animals that you both designated. What do? Achat men tikrab ushniya tamut. One you sacrifice, and one you have to let die. Divrei Rabbi. That's the first opinion of Rabbi. V'chachamim omerim en chatat meta ela shenimsat achar shenitkaperu ba'alim. Hakodem shenitkaperu ba'alim ro'ah. No. He says you would only allow it to die if it after the owner was atoned, meaning after you offered the replacement animal and that brought atonement. Then you let it die. But if you found the original animal before the slaughter of the replacement, then the animal that you found grazes. So here we have a case of, right, let's see here, the animal is lost and found, and it grazes. But regarding Pesach, right, an equivalent case of lost and found would be a shelamim. If it's found after chatzot, right, then it's a shelamim. Kodem shechita, even if it's before shechita. See, we're assuming here that according to Shmuel, the cutoff time is chatzot. The Gemara doesn't explain why it's assuming that. We're going to see later. It's assuming that because it has to contrast with the Yohanan. The Yohanan is the one that said the cutoff time is shechita. So Shmuel has to say chatzot. So here we have a case where it's true, it's after chatzot, but it's before shechita, and yet it's karev shelamim. So that's a contradiction because we have two cases that the animal is found before a shechita of the replacement. And in the case of the chatat, according to Chachamim, ro'ah, whereas in the case of Pesach, it's a shelamim. So that doesn't match up. Ro'ah should go to ro'ah. So the answer is going to be Shmuel. Shmuel must follow the minority opinion of Rabbi. Rabbi says that the chatat offering has to die no matter what, whether it's found before or after slaughter. So here, before slaughter, it dies. And so to our case of Pesach is before the slaughter, afternoon, and it dies. So therefore, it's the same. Okay, good. We answered the question. But we run into a new problem. According to the B, every single case of a lost chatat, and you find it no matter when, it always has to die. But in Pesach, we do have a case, even that everyone would agree, even Shmuel, everyone would agree that if it's lost before chatzot and found before chatzot, then it was rejected. It cannot be brought as a shelamim, and so it has to graze. So here we have a chatat that dies and a Pesach that grazes. That goes against Shmuel's rule. We can answer that by saying kodem chatzot lav avudhu kidraba. Now, if you found it before chatzot, then that's not considered lost. Similar to a chatat, a chatat can be brought in the morning. That's the earliest time. So let's say I designated a chatat, a day before, and it got lost at night. But I found it at night, right before sunrise. I found it again. So it's not called lost because it was never lost at a time when I could sacrifice it. So to a korban pesach, as long as I found it before chatzot, right? So it was never lost at a time when I could have sacrificed it. This is like, if a child goes missing, you call the police. They say, how long is he missing? Right? If you say 3 hours, they say that's not called missing. It has to be missing for 12 hours before we're going to start looking for it. Okay, so since this was found before chatzot, it's not in the category of lost. And then we already established Shmuel's rule only applies to lost cases, not other problematic cases. And so therefore, that would be okay. It's not an exception. Shmuel's rule holds up. But now we still nevertheless have a problem because Rabbi says there's no case of a lost animal in which you would let it graze. He says in all cases of lost animal, no matter when it's found, you always leave it to die. And Shmuel's rule has a stipulation for grazing, right? So Shmuel's rule doesn't fit with Rabbi. כדרבי הושעיה. Maybe he follows רבי הושעיה, דאמר רבי הושעיה, הפריש שתי חטאות לאחריות, מתקפל באחת מהן ושנייה תראה. Let's say a person designates two different chatot animals, not because he lost one, but rather as a backup, as insurance, just in case. So in that case, it's not rejected because he never, he knew he was only going to use one of them. And so he can pick one, and that will be the kapara. And the other one will be, in fact, tid'eh. He can let graze. So you have a case of grazing. So, okay, so we have a case of grazing, and that could fit Shmuel's rule, right? No. If Pesach, you brought two animals, and one was just an insurance, a backup, but it was never rejected, then it would be a shelamim. So now you have the one that's chatat is grazes, and the one that's a Pesach is a shelamim, and that goes against Shmuel's rule. So we need a new solution. Ela Shmuel kedabi Shimon sibir ele damar hamesh chataot metot. So maybe he follows Rabbi Shimon, and he says all these cases of a chatat animal that is in 5 different situations, including those that are lost. So they always die. So that way we don't have to deal with Rabbi Oshaya, right? So they, in this case, also would die. Okay, but now we have back the same problem that you had for the B. According to Rabbi Shimon, all cases of lost animals regarding chatat will die. There's no case of graze. So why would Shmuel talk about a case of grazing if he's limited to lost items? Answer, Shmuel name hada kamad. You're right. Shmuel actually only said the first rule, that the cases of a lost animal chatat has to die is equivalent to a Pesach, which is lost, and that would be shelamim. But he never said the rule about grazing. And so, in fact, it could follow to be Shimon. Okay, Umayka Mashmalan. What's the whole point? If he's not talking about anything about grazing, what was his message? He wanted to say that he disagrees with Rabbi Yohanan. So Rabbi Yohanan says the cutoff time is shechita. If you lost and found the original Korban Pesach before the time of shechita of the replacement, then that's called rejected, and so then it has to graze. Aval kodem shechita lo. Right? If it's found before, then it's no good. If it's found after shechita, then you can bring a shelamim. Before shechita has to graze. Alma shechita kaba kamash malan hasot kaba. So Shmuel's whole rule comes to teach me that he disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan about the cutoff time. According to Shmuel, it's chasot. That's what makes the difference. If the original animal is found before chatzot, then it has to graze. After chatzot, then it can be brought as a shelamim. Okay, so that's all the first version of this discussion, and now the second version is going to pick up not from the beginning, but from this question and answer. Right? So we're agreeing to all this. We asked the original question. We said, wait, it's not true with an animal that's more than 1 year old. Shmuel said, we're only talking about cases that are lost. Okay, fine. And then we wondered, because according to the Chachamim, if a sin offering is found before the replacement, then it grazes. And regarding Pesach, if it's before the replacement sacrifice, but in the afternoon, then that's shelamim. So grazes goes to shelamim. That doesn't match his rule. So what are we going to do with that? So now we're going to pick up again and try to answer that. Maybe the slaughter is the cutoff time. If you say the slaughter is the cutoff time, then that would actually make sense. Because according to the Chachamim, if the sin offering is found before the slaughter of the replacement, then it grazes. And according to Shmuel, if you say slaughter is the cutoff time, as found before, then it also would graze. And that would actually fit totally fine. I actually think that's originally what Shmuel meant. Okay, so we're going to try to answer that. And we're going to say, no, it doesn't work because we have to contrast it with Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so let's see this. Lishna charina, ve'ilu b'Pesach echad avad v'nimsa achar chasot, kodem shechita yikra b'shelamim. And so, right, that was the question we left off on. Shmuel kerabah sebira le'dama shechita kaba. So if Shmuel follows Rabbi on the earlier page against Rabbi Zera, and he would say, therefore, that the shechita is the cutoff time. So if you say that, then Pesach and Chatat are indeed the same. Anytime either a Chatat or a Pesach is found before the slaughter of the replacement, then his rule applies. That one of them would be Chatat would die, and they would both graze in this case. Right. In that case, they would both graze. Yeah, they're both graze. So then that would be fine. And okay, so but we don't like to say that. Yohanan Allah and a Pesach shelamim ela shimsa achar shechita aval kodem shechita la. Now, since the next opinion after Shmuel is Rabbi Yohanan, and he says the cutoff time is shechita, alma shechita kava. Mikol de Shmuel sabar chasot kava. So Shmuel must say something different if he's right there. So he must say that chasot is the time period that that is the cutoff time. And now we have back to the contradiction that we have a case where in a shelamim before the replacement is sacrificed, you graze. But in the Pesach, if it's before slaughter in afternoon, it's shelamim. And so now we don't have an answer to that. So Ela Shmuel kedabi sibira le damar abudah lemitazai follows Rabbi, because Rabbi says that the chatat offering dies no matter what, whether it's found before or after the slaughter. And so that would resolve the case where the Pesach is found afternoon but before slaughter. That would also be shelamim. Hold on, but you have the case that if it's found before chatzot, if the Pesach is found before chatzot, then it should go out, it should graze. And yet, according to the B, all cases would be that the chatat dies. So now you have a mismatch where the chatat dies and the Pesach grazes, and that goes against Shmuel's rule. Kasabar kodem chasot lava budhu bekasabar chasot kava. Oh, you know what? He could say that, since it's lost before chatzot, it's not considered a case of being lost. And so Shmuel was only talking about lost cases. And he thinks that, in fact, the midday is what determines. And so, since this is not a case of being lost at all, so it does not violate Shmuel's rule, and so in the end, that is the machlok between them. Whether it's the time, the cutoff time is the time of slaughter of the replacement, or the time of chatzot. And so that's it. Then we have two ways of reconciling Shmuel's rule with, and also assuming that he disagrees with Rabbi Yohanan. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.